This story is inspired by a real near-death experience. Names and events have been altered to protect privacy and enhance dramatization. If you've experienced an ND or know someone who has, share your story in the comments. I always thought life was a game, and I was winning. Every deal I closed, every competitor I crushed, every employee I exploited. It all felt like proof of my success. My name, James Whitmore, was synonymous with power and wealth. People admired me, envied me, feared me, and I liked it that way. I ran my empire from a penthouse office that overlooked the city, a fortress of glass and steel. The world was mine to command, or so I believed. That morning, I was sitting at my oversized mahogany desk, sipping an espresso while a junior associate nervously laid out the numbers from our latest acquisition. I barely heard him. My mind was already on to the next deal, the next conquest. "Cut the overhead," I said coldly, interrupting his presentation. "Fire whoever you need to make the margins work." He hesitated, his eyes darting to the door as if he wanted to run. "But, sir, some of these layoffs will devastate entire departments. There's talk of families." I waved him off, my patience thin. "I'm not running a charity. Make it happen." The associate nodded, defeated, and left. I didn't care. People were just numbers on a balance sheet to me. My phone buzzed. A reminder about the board meeting I was already late for. Grabbing my keys, I strode out, my polished shoes echoing in the marble hallway. The meeting was a disaster. Shareholders were questioning my decisions, their voices rising in a cacophony of doubt. I felt my control slipping, a rare but intolerable sensation. One board member, a middle-aged man with a face etched in frustration, stood up and pointed at me. "James, your greed is unsustainable," he said. "You're bleeding this company dry while padding your own pockets. If you don't change course, you'll destroy everything we've built." My anger flared. "Everything we built." I shot back. "I made this company what it is. If you don't like how I run things, feel free to resign." The room went silent, tension crackling like static electricity. I left without another word, my blood boiling. Who were they to question me? I had built this empire, brick by brick, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me. As I sped down the highway in my sleek sports car, the city lights blurred past me like streaks of gold and white. The adrenaline coursed through my veins, a familiar high that dulled the sting of the meeting. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I pressed harder on the gas. My phone buzzed again, another notification I ignored. Then, without warning, it rang. The name on the screen was Angela, my estranged sister. We hadn't spoken in years, and the sight of her name stirred a mix of guilt and annoyance. Against my better judgment, I answered. "What do you want, Angela?" I snapped, my tone as sharp as the turns I was taking. "James, I've been trying to reach you," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "I heard about the layoffs. Do you even care what you're doing to people? These are lives, James, real lives." "I don't have time for this lecture," I said, cutting her off. "You don't understand how the world works. It's not personal, it's business." She sighed, the sound filled with a sadness I wasn't ready to confront. "One day, James, you're going to realize what you've done. I just hope it's not too late." Before I could respond, the call dropped. My focus snapped back to the road just in time to see the red taillights of the car in front of me. I swerved, but the tires screamed against the pavement. The world tilted as my car spun out of control, crashing into the guardrail with a deafening impact. Everything went dark. My body was weightless, my thoughts suspended in an infinite void. I should have felt pain, fear, something, but there was only silence. The last thing I remember was the sound of my heartbeat slowing, fading, until it disappeared entirely, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I expected pain, the screech of tires, or the chaos of emergency responders. Instead, I found myself standing in an endless expanse of golden sand. The sky was a pale, muted orange. stretching infinitely above me without a single cloud or trace of sun. It was quiet, eerily quiet, with no wind, no sound, just an oppressive stillness that pressed against me. I looked down at myself, expecting blood or injuries, but there was nothing. My body was intact, but it felt lighter, as if the weight of physical existence had been stripped away. My tailored suit, the symbol of my power and wealth, was gone, replaced by something plain and unremarkable. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt exposed. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. It didn't echo or carry. It simply dissolved into the emptiness. I took a hesitant step forward, the sand beneath me shifting, but leaving no trace of my footprints. The vastness was disorienting, but I couldn't stand still. A strange pull urged me to move, though I had no idea where I was going or what I was searching for. After what felt like hours, though time had lost all meaning, I saw a figure in the distance. My heart leapt at the sight of another person, but as I approached, the shape grew clearer and my relief turned to dread. It was an old employee of mine, Paul, who had worked in my company's logistics department. I fired him during one of my infamous cost-cutting sprees. I hadn't thought about him in years. "Paul," I said, my voice cracking, "what are you doing here?" He didn't respond immediately. His form was faint, almost translucent, but his expression was clear, pain, betrayal, and exhaustion etched across his face. "Do you remember me, James?" he finally said, his tone sharp and accusing. "Do you remember what you took from me?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Memories surged forward. Paul's pleading during that layoff meeting, his desperation as he explained how much he needed the job to support his sick wife and 2 kids. I had dismissed him with a cold indifference, telling myself it was necessary for the company's bottom line. "You didn't just fire me," Paul continued, his voice rising. "You destroyed us. My wife couldn't get the treatment she needed. I couldn't pay the rent. Do you know what it's like to watch everything you've built collapse because of someone else's greed?" I didn't know," I stammered, the weight of his words suffocating. "You didn't care," he shot back before his figure faded into the golden haze, leaving me alone once more. More figures appeared as I wandered through the desert. Each one brought a new wave of guilt and shame. There was Maria, the single mother who had worked tirelessly in my customer service department before I outsourced her entire team. There was Alan, a supplier whose small business crumbled when I strong-armed him into an unsustainable contract. Each encounter was a mirror, reflecting the consequences of my actions in ways I had never considered. Their words weren't just accusations. They were truths, raw and undeniable, cutting deeper than any physical wound. And with every story, the desert grew heavier, the air thicker, as if the weight of their pain was manifesting around me. But the worst came when I saw Angela, my sister. She stood apart from the others, her arms crossed and her expression a mixture of disappointment and sorrow. "Angela," I said, my voice breaking, "what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" she repeated, her voice steady but laced with hurt. "What are you doing here, James? Do you even realize how far you've fallen?" I reached out to her, but she stepped back, her figure flickering like a mirage. "You pushed me away, James. You pushed everyone away. You told yourself it was all for the sake of success. But what do you have to show for it? Money? Power? Look around you. None of it matters here." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I couldn't. Deep down, I knew she was right. The desert wasn't a punishment. It was a reflection of the life I had built, an empty wasteland shaped by my greed and indifference. As Angela's form faded, I dropped to my knees, the sand shifting beneath me. For the first time in my life, I felt powerless. The empire I had built, the wealth I had amassed, the control I had fought so hard to maintain, none of it meant anything here. I was alone, surrounded by the ghosts of my choices. But then, in the distance, I saw something. It was faint at first, a soft glow on the horizon, but it grew brighter as I focused on it. It wasn't like the oppressive sun I had expected in this desert. It was warm, inviting, and alive. It called to me, not with words, but with a feeling, a promise of understanding, maybe even redemption. I rose slowly, my legs weak but driven by a newfound determination. Whatever this light was, I had to reach it. I had to understand what it wanted to show me. And so, I walked toward it, leaving the echoes of my past behind me, unsure of what lay ahead but certain that I couldn't stay in the emptiness any longer. The light grew brighter with each step, casting long shadows across the desert sands. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was warm, alive, and pulsing with a rhythm that resonated deep within me. As I approached, I realized it wasn't a single source but a collection of glowing figures, their forms shimmering like golden flames against the endless expanse. They stood in a circle, waiting. Unlike the spectral figures I had encountered earlier, these beings radiated neither accusation nor pain. Instead, they exuded a profound sense of understanding, as though they already knew everything about me. Every secret, every failure, every moment I had tried to bury. And yet, there was no judgment in their light, only an invitation to face the truth. As I stepped into the circle, the sands beneath me began to shift. The desert faded away, replaced by vivid images that seemed to rise from the ground like mirages. These weren't just memories. They were living, breathing moments from my life, as real and tangible as if I were reliving them. The first image was from years ago, during the early days of my career. I saw myself sitting in a cramped office, poring over financial reports late into the night. Back then, I had been driven by a hunger for success, convinced that wealth and power were the only measures of a life well lived. But the scene shifted quickly, and I watched as that ambition turned to greed. I saw the deals I had made, the corners I had cut, and the people I had stepped on to climb the corporate ladder. Each decision played out before me, magnified in its consequences. I saw employees leaving my office with tears in their eyes after being laid off. I saw vendors struggling to stay afloat after I forced them into impossible contracts. And then I saw Paul again. The memory was vivid. Him standing in my office, his voice trembling as he begged me not to terminate his position. "My wife is sick," he had said, desperation etched into every word. "I just need a little more time." I had barely looked up from my desk. This isn't personal, Paul. It's business. Watching it now, I felt a wave of nausea. I had told myself at the time that it was necessary, that sacrifices had to be made for the company's survival. But seeing the pain in Paul's eyes, knowing what had followed for him and his family, it was unbearable. The images shifted faster now, each one striking like a blow. Maria, the single mother I had fired. Alan, the supplier whose business I had crushed. Faces blurred together, their voices blending into a cacophony of pain and anger. And then came the most painful memory of all, Angela, my sister. The scene unfolded in our parents' living room. It was Christmas, years ago, and the air had been heavy with tension. Angela had confronted me about my choices, her voice rising in frustration. "Do you even see what you're doing, James?" she had shouted. "You're turning into someone I don't even recognize. It's all money and power to you. What about family? What about people?" I had scoffed, dismissing her concerns with a wave of my hand. "Not everyone can afford to be idealistic, Angela. Some of us have to live in the real world." The memory froze on her face, her eyes filled with tears of anger and disappointment. And then it dissolved, leaving me standing in the circle once more, my chest heaving with the weight of it all. The glowing figures moved closer, their light intensifying. Their voices weren't words but resonances, emotions that flowed directly into my mind. You have seen the threads of your actions, they conveyed. Each choice you made wove a tapestry of consequence. Do you understand the pain you have caused? Yes, I whispered, my voice cracking. I see it now. I see all of it. The figures pulsed gently, their light shifting from gold to a softer, more forgiving hue. You have lived a life driven by greed, believing wealth to be the measure of success. But wealth is meaningless without compassion. True success is found in the lives you uplift, not in the profits you amass. Their words pierced me like a blade. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but there was no point. Everything they said was true. My life, my choices, had left a trail of pain and emptiness. The desert wasn't a punishment. It was a reflection of the world I had created. But what can I do? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. I can't undo what I've done. I can't bring back what I've destroyed. You cannot change the past, the figures replied. But you can shape the future. The threads you have woven are not the end of your story. You have the power to create new threads, ones of kindness, generosity, and compassion. The images around me began to shift again, but this time, they were not of the past. They were visions of what could be. I saw myself reaching out to the people I had wronged, offering apologies and restitution. I saw the foundation I would create, using my wealth to support employees, families, and communities. I saw lives transformed, not by my greed, but by my willingness to give back. The figure's light grew brighter, surrounding me completely. Your journey does not end here, they said. Return and use what you have learned to weave a tapestry of meaning. Redemption is not found in words, but in actions. The light became blinding, and I felt myself being pulled downward, back toward the world I had left behind. As the desert faded from view, the final words of the tribunal echoed in my mind. Wealth is a tool. Use it to build, not to destroy. The first sensation that greeted me was pain. It radiated from my ribs, my arms, my head. Every part of me screamed in protest as I regained consciousness. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of machinery. Slowly, I opened my eyes to the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. I was in a hospital room. The white walls, the 4 drip beside me, the steady beeping of a heart monitor. It all felt jarringly real after the surreal expanse of the desert. But the memory of that place, of the glowing figures and the truths they had revealed, was as vivid as if I were still there. A nurse appeared by my bedside, her expression soft but professional. "You're awake," she said, her voice a mixture of relief and curiosity. "You've been through a lot. You're lucky to be alive." Lucky. The word echoed in my mind, heavy with irony. I didn't feel lucky. I felt exposed, raw, as though my very soul had been laid bare. The memories of the desert, of Paul, Maria, Angela, and the tribunal, flooded back with unrelenting clarity. How long have I been here? I croaked, my throat dry and raspy. 2 days, the nurse replied, adjusting the monitors. "You were in a serious car accident. The paramedics said it's a miracle you survived." A miracle. I wasn't sure what I believed anymore, but I couldn't deny that something extraordinary had happened. I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. 2 days. 2 days since my world had been turned inside out. Later that day, Angela walked into my room. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, but there was a spark of determination in her gaze. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at me as though she were trying to decide whether I was real. "Angela," I whispered, my voice trembling. She crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "I didn't think you'd make it," she said bluntly. "You're lucky to be alive." "I know," I said, the weight of my memories pressing down on me. "Angela, Don't," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "I don't want your excuses, James. I've heard them all before. You've spent years pushing people away, hurting everyone around you. Why should I believe anything's changed?" Her words stung, but I couldn't argue. She was right. My life had been a testament to selfishness, a monument to greed. But I wasn't the same person who had walked into that car 2 days ago. I had seen too much, learned too much to go back to who I was. "Because it has," I said finally, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. Angela, I've been given a second chance. I don't know how to explain it, but I saw things that made me realize how much I've failed, how much damage I've caused. I can't change the past, but I want to make things right. I need to. Her expression softened, just a little. She pulled up a chair and sat beside me, her posture still tense but less hostile. If that's true, she said quietly, then prove it. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and reflection. Every ache in my body, every bandage and bruise, felt like a reminder of the life I had been spared and the lessons I had been given. I couldn't let them go to waste. The first step was reaching out to those I had wronged. I started with Paul. It wasn't easy to track him down, but with Angela's help, I managed to get his number. The phone call was one of the hardest things I had ever done. "Paul," I said when he answered, my voice shaking. "It's James Whitmore." There was a long silence on the other end. When he finally spoke, his tone was cold. "What do you want?" "I wanted to apologize," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "For everything, for what I did to you and your family. I know I can't undo the harm I caused, but I want to make amends. Please let me help." Paul didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was wary but less harsh. "I don't know if you can fix what's already been done, but if you're serious about making amends, start by listening to the people you've hurt." That conversation set the tone for what came next. I reached out to Maria, Alan, and others whose lives I had disrupted in my pursuit of wealth. Some accepted my apologies. Others were less forgiving, but I didn't let their rejection deter me. The tribunal's words echoed in my mind. Redemption is not found in words, but in actions. I decided to start a foundation, using my wealth to support the people and communities I had exploited. It wasn't a quick fix or an attempt to buy forgiveness. It was a way to create the ripples of kindness and compassion I had seen in the visions. As the foundation took shape, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Not the shallow satisfaction of closing a deal or adding another zero to my bank account, but a deep, fulfilling sense of doing something that mattered. One evening, Angela visited me at my apartment. It was the first time she had been there in years, and her expression as she looked around spoke volumes. "You've changed," she said simply, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "I'm trying," I replied. "It's not easy, but I'm trying." She nodded, her lips curving into a small, tentative smile. "It's a start." The following months were a whirlwind of action and reflection. My recovery wasn't just physical. It was a transformation of my entire existence. I had always thought my wealth was my greatest achievement, but now I understood that its true value lay not in accumulating it, but in how I could use it to make a difference. The James Whitmore Foundation was born out of necessity, not pride. I channeled my resources into helping those whose lives I had disrupted, employees who had lost their jobs, small businesses I had crushed, and communities left reeling from my greed. The first project was a scholarship fund for the children of employees I had laid off, including Paul's family. When I called Paul to tell him about it, there was a long silence on the other end. "Why now?" he finally asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. "Why do you care all of a sudden?" "I've had time to see the damage I caused," I replied honestly. "This isn't about me. It's about trying to make things right. For you, for your family, for everyone I hurt. I know it'll never be enough, but I want to try." Paul didn't say much, but he accepted the gesture. And for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could begin to undo some of the harm I had done. The foundation grew quickly, not because of my name, but because of the people it helped. Maria, the single mother I had fired, became one of its directors, overseeing programs for employee wellness. Alan, the supplier I had strong-armed, partnered with the foundation to support small businesses. Their success stories became the foundation's heartbeat, proof that change was possible. I didn't just write checks and step back. I visited the communities I had once ignored, sat in crowded rooms, and listened to stories of hardship and resilience. For the first time, I saw the human side of business, the side I had spent my career overlooking. And each story, each handshake, each tear-filled conversation became a thread in the tapestry of redemption I was trying to weave. While the foundation was thriving, my transformation extended beyond it. I began speaking publicly about my journey, not just the accident, but the lessons I had learned in the desert. At first, I was hesitant, unsure if people would take me seriously, but the response was overwhelming. At one event, a young man approached me after my speech. "I used to think success was about money," he said, his voice shaking. "But hearing your story, it makes me realize there's more to it than that. Thank you." His words reminded me of the tribunal's message. Wealth is a tool. Use it to build, not to destroy. I carried those words with me everywhere I went, sharing them with anyone willing to listen. One evening, Angela invited me to dinner at her home. It had been years since I had stepped through her door, but the warmth of her greeting and the laughter of her kids filled the space with a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I missed. As we sat at the table, she leaned over and placed a hand on mine. "I'm proud of you," she said softly, "for everything you're doing. It's more than I ever expected." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time, they weren't from guilt or shame. They were from gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered, "for believing in me, even when I didn't deserve it." Late one night, I sat on my balcony, overlooking the city that had once been my playground. The lights twinkled like stars, each one representing a life, a story, a connection. I thought of the desert, the glowing figures, and the faces of those I had wronged. Their voices still echoed in my mind, but now they felt like a call to action rather than a condemnation. I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alive, not because of what I had, but because of what I was giving back. My journey wasn't about erasing the past. It was about transforming it. The wealth I once worshipped became a tool for change, and the life I nearly lost became a second chance to do something meaningful. If you've ever felt trapped by your choices, remember this: it's never too late to rewrite your story. Redemption isn't about perfection. It's about taking the first step toward making things right. Thank you for watching this story of transformation and hope. If it resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful journeys. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that change is always possible. Together, let's create ripples of compassion and connection in a world that desperately needs them.